Hello, I am Alyssa Taylor Stewart, and on behalf of the entire Parent University team, I'd like to welcome all of you to tonight's workshop, The Impact of Grief and Loss on Our Children. This workshop is presented by our friends at the New Hope Grief Support Community, David Leonard, Executive Director, and Chris Cano, Program Manager. Please use the link in the video frame to ask questions or share comments. Rebecca Fast from our Parent University team will be leading the Q&A. If your question isn't addressed during this hour, someone from our office will reach out to you directly. Thank you, and please welcome our presenters, David Leonard and Chris Cano.
Thank you so much, Alyssa, for having us here with you today and being able to join in this wonderful thing you guys call Parent University. It is an honor and a pleasure. I'm born and raised in the beautiful city of Long Beach, so it is really exciting to be able to give back in this capacity and to serve the wonderful children and families of the Long Beach Unified School District. So I'm sure I share the same sentiments that Chris do, and we really are deeply grateful and thankful for this opportunity to be with here today and to talk about, like you named already, grief and loss. And that can be a very confusing and heavy and challenging topic sometimes, but I am hopeful that by you tuning in today and listening, that you are going to hopefully walk away with some tools and some strategies that are going to help you to really have this conversation as a family unit, but also one-on-one between you and your student. But before we get into that, I want to share a bit about who I am. I have the honor to serve as the Executive Director of New Hope Grief Support Community. I've been in this role for 5 years, and I kind of have a personal connection to grief and loss. I as a young man, experienced grief from the death of my mother, and also I had lost many relatives. But my mother was the loss that was a huge impact for me while I was going to college. And so I completely identify with how difficult it can be, especially for a student, to be able to focus and get the things done that they need to do. So for me, my journey really started with the death of my mother, and then leading me into grief work and wanting to serve and help other people who are in the same journey, because we believe that we suffer in isolation and begin to find healing together in community. And that's exactly what we're doing here today. I also want to introduce my colleague, Chris Cano. He can share a bit about kind of his journey and his story around grief work.
Yeah, Chris Cano. I was kind of really born and raised around grief. My dad owned a mortuary up in Northern California. And I later went into the business myself as a licensed funeral director. Worked in that industry for 8 years. Left it, went into full-time ministry working with inner city youth, and then church planting, and then working in a church, and then going through my own loss myself. Feeling drawn back into grief work, where I met David Leonard. Started as a volunteer at New Hope back in 2016. Came on staff, now working here since 2018. Love working with students, love working with people in pain, and we're honored to be here today.
Thank you so much, Chris. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we can dive into our presentation and give some context and some framework for our parents and those who are listening today. So again, this is New Hope Grief and Loss Workshop, the impact of grief and loss in our children. And living through the pandemic really created more isolation. And then if you add grief into that, so many people, we know that the estimated number of children as of today in the United States that experienced the death of a parent during the pandemic, and specifically to COVID, is 180,000. It's 180,000 youngsters under the age of 18 that have lost a parent, not counting cancer and other forms of death. So who is New Hope Grief Support Community? We are a nonprofit organization here in the city of Long Beach, and our mission is to bring hope and healing into the lives of bereaved children and their families through connection and support. And workshops is one of the ways that we do that, educating and equipping parents and educators. We also offer adult support groups in the evenings. We do family bereavement camps. We'll talk more about that later. And we also work with the Long Beach Unified School District supporting bereaved students. We've been around for 18 plus years here in the beautiful city of Long Beach. And again, we're just grateful that we can serve as a hub and a tribe for those who are grieving to come and find connection and support. We're going to cover the realities of grief and common grief reactions, the role of parents and guardians, whether that's grandparents or aunts and uncles, other adult people helping to raise grieving children. We'll go over some grief resources for you, and then we'll spend some time for some Q&A for those questions you have. We'll make sure you can put them in the Google form. So our website is www.newhopegrief.org. And if you want to reach out, you can learn about many of our services there and how we can help to serve your family. So there are 3 grief realities that we want to share with you before we get into grief too deep. You know, there's a lot of things out there about grief and loss. People talk about different stages and phases and what it looks like. But before we even talk about timelines, what we want to share with you is this, and this is something we share with adults and children. After someone dies and the cards and the casseroles are gone, that's when the real grief starts to set in. And so one of the things we say is you are not going crazy. You may feel like you're going crazy. Your loved one's gone. Maybe the people around you are grieving differently than you, and you feel like you're just going a little crazy. I want to remind you that you are not going crazy. Number 2, everything you are feeling is normal. All those emotions and feelings that are coming with your grief, the grief your kids are experiencing, it's all normal. It is a normal part of grief, and grief is our normal response because we loved or cared about someone. When they die and that void is not filled by that person, it is an absolutely normal response to have grief. That is the one universal experience everyone will have here on planet Earth. And finally, you have permission to grieve. We, in Western culture and society, we tend to have funerals and memorials and different rituals, but as soon as those are done, and the cards have come, and the casseroles and the flowers and all those things, people don't tend to know how to approach us or how to engage with us. And so we want to remind you, though, that no matter what's going on, you have permission to grieve, and you need to give your kids permission to grieve and your students so that they can grieve healthy and know that it's okay. It's okay to cry. It's okay to have feelings and those emotions, and that they're not going crazy. So grief oftentimes can feel like this ball in the pit of your stomach. It can feel heavy, it can feel dark, and it can feel like it's weighing you down. It's a burden. And we experience that both individually, and we can experience that collectively as a family or as a community. When someone maybe prominent in the community dies, we can all feel it, or in our family unit when someone dies, a parent, a grandparent, a child. It can feel like this huge weight in our stomach. And we call this the tangled ball of emotions. And it ranges from anxiety, panic, to dismay, apathy, sorrow, denial, abandonment, rage, pain, etc., etc. And you can experience these at any given time during your grief and during your grief process. And your children will experience all these same emotions. Our children and students are not exempt from having these same emotions that adults are having. And it's important as parents and guardians that you recognize your own feelings and do an inventory, but that you also recognize that your kids are feeling the exact same way for that person you loved who's died.
When it comes to grief theory, there's a lot of them out there. There's a lot of grief models, but probably the most popular one that we've most likely heard of would be the 5 stages of grief. And this is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's work, published in 1969. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. This model's caught lots of traction within pop culture. It's probably the extent of what even a lot of psychologists get around grief, which is Kubler-Ross's 5 stages. But it's a bit misleading in the sense that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross really designed and published this after working with people who were dying. So people who are facing their own mortality started in this stage of denial. They move to anger. They move into this stage of bargaining. And then there's this depression that leads to acceptance. The reason that this could be hurtful and misleading for people who are bereaved, who are experiencing the death of a loved one, and now have to pick up the pieces and continue to live on, is it feels like there's supposed to be these linear stages. In fact, just recently I watched a movie on Netflix called The Starling, and it has a famous comedian actress in it And she goes to a veterinarian she's dealing with the loss of a child. She goes to a veterinarian who turns out to be her therapist, a weird sequence of events. And he says, do you know what the third stage of grief is? And she's like, it comes after the second. And he said, well, yeah, but it's anger and it's denial. And then she says, well, what's the next stage? And he says, depression. And she says, great, I can't wait. And so there's this sense of like, I'm going to work through these stages. And now I'm really angry and I'm trying to bargain to try to navigate my way through this. And now I've got depression to look forward to. But the reality is, I've been doing this for 20 years. David's been doing this for years. And we say this often, if I've met one griever, I've met one griever. Grief looks very different for everybody. And it's as unique as somebody's fingerprint. And so often when we feel the expectations that we should be grieving a certain way, then we can start to move to feeling like I am going crazy, like there is something wrong with me. And when we look at other people who are grieving differently than us, we can also move to a space of there must be something wrong with them or there must be something wrong with me. And so grief is like a tangled ball of emotions. Grief is very unique, and it rarely ends up in some kind of a linear stage. It comes in waves. The next slide, there's a great quote that deals with this, and it says, grief is not just a series of events, stages, or timelines. Our society places enormous pressure on us to get over the loss, to get through the grief. But how long do you grieve for a husband of 50 years? A teenager killed in a car accident? A 4-year-old child? Is it a year, 5 years, forever? A loss happens in a moment, but its aftermath lasts a lifetime. There's a sense in this next slide that we have this feeling that we're going to get over our grief, that even within our environment, it's very common for people to take 3 days bereavement off of work, and then they're right back into it. And that over time, it's supposed to just get smaller and smaller and smaller to where grief is no longer experienced. And so it looks like this. There's this jar with this big grief right at the beginning. It's just consuming your life. But over time, your loved one doesn't have such an impact. And then over further time, it keeps getting smaller and smaller. But this is not the reality of grief. And if you are currently grieving or you've been grieving for a while, you know this not to be true. But it looks more like this next slide, where grief stays the same. The loss that you've experienced, the love that you carry for this person will leave a huge hollow spot in your heart and in your life. And then over time, that grief stays the same way. And when we work with grieving children and grieving teens and with adults and with families, it's really important that we correct kind of this bad information that you're all of a sudden going to get over this person and then you're going to kind of move on with your life. But the reality is we build this enduring connection with our loved one. We redefine the relationship. We find ways to honor that connection through maybe taking on some of their habits or passion projects. So there's ways that we really work with people to validate the reality that your grief is not going to get smaller. It's not going to get less important to you or have a less impact on your life. Over time, it will get easier. Over time, when you recall memories of your loved one, you will experience more laughter than just tears. You'll cherish memories rather than just harbor pain. And what inevitably happens is you see that we begin to grow around the grief, that our lives take on a greater capacity of love, of life, of living, and that the grief is still there, and that it's something that we're always going to carry with us.
Thank you, Chris. So we want to shift a little bit and to talk about how grief impacts youth, kind of by age, and what are some common grief responses in both children, school-age children, and teenagers. So ways that school-age children, 5 to 12 years old, may grieve, and I want to say that this is not a full exhaustive list, but these are some ways that they may be processing their grief. But there can be additional ways, and you may have seen that in your own child. But blaming themselves for the death, looking for or sensing the person's presence, so they're longing for them, they want to see them, they want to hear them, being distracted and forgetful, right? When someone dies, it's a huge void, they're grieving. Sometimes we call it grief brain. They can't think or remember things. Kids do that too. Having increased anxiety for their safety and the safety of the people they care about. This is a big one, especially when someone has died tragically through a car accident, motorcycle accident, some other kind of tragic accident. They can think that their other loved ones are going to die also. And so they can become pretty protective of their siblings, even of the living parent who's still with them. Not wanting to be separated from caregivers. Again, this anxiety or wanting to be connected to. Now dad's gone or grandma died or whomever. They don't want to be taken away from the other important people in their lives. Having physical complaints. Grief affects us physically. I think this is a big one we need to understand, that can be a tummy ache, headaches. When I've had grief, I feel it in my neck. You get really tense. And so kids also will experience this as well. They may try to suppress their emotions to protect the adults around them. So kids are really intuitive and understand how parents are feeling also, and adults around them around the death of someone who died. So they may not want to make them sad, or they may not want to upset them. So they in turn will suppress their own emotions for the sake of the adults around them. But we actually want the opposite to happen. We'll talk more about that later. Being quiet or not showing a response to the death, feeling strong emotional reactions such as anger and guilt or a sense of rejection. That's kind of the tangled ball of emotions. They may feel all of those things. Behavioral issues such as aggression, tantrums, defiance, getting into trouble. Now, if your child is already having behavioral issues at school, this could only exacerbate or increase the frequency of these things happening. Change in eating and sleeping habits can occur for children who are grieving or have lost a parent or someone dear to them. And they may try to please adults and take on adult responsibilities. We see this often with older siblings. When a parent dies, an older sibling may take on the responsibility of trying to make dinner or bring in the groceries or babysit for the younger siblings or get them bathed or showered. All those things they're trying to take on to help a grieving parent. So this is our 5 to 12-year-olds. And like I said, there can be additional, but these are some of the common ones we wanted to share with you. For teenagers, difficulty concentrating or being easily distracted, right? I mean, they're already on their phones, which is super distracting. Social media technology is already distracting. But now you bring grief into it, this can exacerbate. Withdrawal or needing more personal space, taking on adult responsibilities, becoming the carer for those around. And we see this in older siblings, again, more responsibility. Self-isolation, so they may isolate more, be in their bedroom, wanting to be by themselves. We know that long periods of sadness can move into depression, but not always. Being overwhelmed by intense reactions like guilt and anger or fear, they may feel that intensely. Having questions about mortality, their own mortality, death and dying, and spirituality, questioning higher powers or gods or things. These are all things that come up when death happens. And teenagers tend to ask those bigger questions as to why did this happen? They may try to suppress their emotions to protect the adults around them. They may use jokes to humor and mask their real feelings of grief and loss. They may dream or sense a presence of the person who has died. Teens will take more risk-taking behavior. They're also having a change in self-image. So they may have lower self-esteem or confidence when a parent dies or a loved one dies or a best friend dies. Or they may try to please adults and take on, again, those extra responsibilities that they might not normally take on, or we don't want them to take on because they're still kids.
In just a second, we're going to move on to how you as parents or caregivers can support grieving children. But I want to pause here just for a second and tell you one of the most important things that you can do in helping to support a grieving child is to help support yourself. And we use this image a lot when you're in an airplane and they go through the instructions of what to do in case of an emergency. And should we lose cabin pressure, a mask will come down. You need to put the mask first on yourself to make sure you're okay, so that you're around to put the mask on your children. And that's true of grief as well. You need to be able to understand your own grief and how you react to grief, because there's an old saying, is more is caught than taught. So even as you seek to support, it's very important to be self-aware. So there's just two things I want to give you before we move on to the next slide. And the first is that there's this dual process model around grief that talks about grievers in general. The study shows that they tend to oscillate between loss-oriented matters and life or restoration-oriented matters. So normal grief would look like, sometimes you're focused more in on the loss, other times more restoration, and that grievers typically move and oscillate back and forth between these two things. At times, there's just periods of sadness, of being depressed, and at other times, it's moving forward and figuring out how to adjust and adapt to the life after the loss of a loved one. And so it's very normal for people to oscillate back and forth. One moment, they're over here on this side, and the next, they're over here. There's also two dominant styles of grief done by some other researchers that say that on this scale, there's over here on this end, there's more intuitive grievers, which would be people who are more feelings-based. They cry more. They're kind of in their sadness more. And then over here, there's more instrumental or practical grievers who like to stay active and busy. Now, the reason I give this to you is when you identify your own style of grieving, that becomes our normal. And so particularly when you see someone who grieves very differently than you, say you're a very practical griever and you come across someone in your family who is more of an intuitive griever, and we get this a lot in our grief work of, I think there's something wrong with them because all they do is cry. Or if you're more an intuitive grievers as a family or as an individual, and you see that person who's just very active and working and handling details and staying busy, then in turn there we will hear people say, I think there's something wrong with them. It seems like they're not even grieving. And so this becomes really important for us as we view and evaluate ourselves, as much as it is when we start to look upon other people and we have expectations. And like we said before, grief is as unique as the fingerprint. People fall along the scale, maybe more practical, more instrumental, or more intuitive, in that we all fall someplace in the middle. But recognizing that that's very typical as well, that there are dominant styles of grief, I think will help us as we now move into this next section of figuring out ways that we can best support children and teens in our family.
And I want to remind our viewers, if you have a question, we'll have a Q&A at the end. Please, please, please put it in the Google form, and Rebecca will be sure to share your questions with us.
Regardless of age or background, parents or caregivers can be supportive in the following ways. And one of the best things we can do is ask open-ended questions. We know this, a lot of us know this intuitively, and yet I still, as a parent, find myself asking the question, did you have a good day at school? Which, again, you're going to get a yes or no answer depending on the age of the child, but asking open-ended questions, tell me something that went well today. That's the same as it works with grief. Tell me what are you feeling right now, rather than say, do you feel okay or are you okay? Find ways to ask questions that avoid yes or no answers and give you opportunities to dig a little bit deeper. Again, modeling out grief, talk openly about grief. It may be easy for kids to identify feelings of anger or frustration, but try to make opportunities to make connections between the way they feel and the loss they're experiencing so they can identify the cause. Help them label their true feelings and recognize that grief is normal. And one of the things I find myself saying a lot when I'm speaking with people who are grieving is, of course, you would feel that way. To recognize, to reflect back the emotions that they are sharing with you, or maybe you're seeing in them, is a great way to validate and witness that pain. Acknowledge their feelings. Even if you don't fully understand the way your child is feeling, it's really important to acknowledge the way they feel is real and let them know it's okay and normal to feel that way. Encourage them to avoid comparing their reaction to loss with anyone else's. Everyone's feelings are important when coping with grief, even if they look different. And even when a child or a teen shares something that may feel misplaced, and this is very common with guilt and regret, resist the temptation as a caregiver, as a parent, to rescue them and say, don't feel that way. If one of the things we try to do most in grief is help them identify and express their emotions, the last thing we want to do is start any sentence with, don't feel. Encourage that feeling. Encourage them to name those feelings. And when you can become a container for pain, then they will go deeper and they will share more. And there's a great quote I love by Edith Eger that says, that which is expressed will not be repressed. So the more that they can express around those emotions, acknowledging those emotions, the more healing then can enter in to their lives. Along those lines, avoid minimizing or dismissing feelings. It's natural and tempting to want to make kids feel better, but try to avoid saying things like, these things happen for a reason. You'll be stronger because of it. Because even if you mean well, statements like these can make them feel worse and discourage them from continuing to share feelings in the future. Instead, genuinely acknowledge their feelings and help them manage them with the tips below. Keep the dialogue open. Kids' feelings may change drastically from moment to moment. Again, it's very normal for them to oscillate between loss and with life, but encourage them to talk about it. And if they don't want to talk about it, help them find other outlets for their feelings, like journaling or creating art as a next level of expression for them.
Yeah, and I want to share there too, when you can actually physically do something as a family together, like play a board game or scrapbook or make a memory box, different things like that. Those are great opportunities where kids will let their guard down and really then want to talk about their loved one who died. And that's a great opportunity to ask things like, hey, share a favorite memory about them, or what's a funny story about them. And that gives you an opportunity as a parent to open the dialogue in a way that's healthy, but also while doing something fun together that can also sometimes be an activity of honoring or remembering the person who's died.
Offering reassurance is something that will keep the dialogue going and help our children and teens continue to dig deeper around their grief and loss. Sometimes kids, particularly younger kids, have trouble understanding and they may incorrectly blame themselves. You may hear them say something like, if maybe I would have called grandma, she wouldn't have died. Reassuring them that they had nothing to do with it and that they're not responsible for what happened is the objective. And I think how you do that is very important. So one of the things, again, to avoid minimizing or dismissing a feeling is maybe asking the question, do you think they may have died if you didn't call them? Which then allows them to kind of reframe and rethink through, okay, maybe it isn't guilt, but maybe there's some regret there. And that reframe around, right, so you regret not having a chance to speak with them before grandma died. And that's a reframe that helps remove a lot of the guilt or the blame that a lot of people carry whenever there's grief. And I'll just say this on this one too. I think that it's very common for kids and teens to blame themselves when something tragic happens. This is very common in divorce. Kids often will blame themselves, which, again, divorce, loss of family is a huge loss, and there's lots of grief. And the same goes with death. And I think the way that it works is it's easier for them to blame themselves than to accept and believe that life is out of control, right? So if this could happen and it's not my fault, then this could happen again, and it makes it unsafe. But in turn, if I can blame myself, then I can believe that maybe if I make a better decision moving forward, I can avoid this level of pain again. And again, that's going to be one of those areas that you want to be able to do a reframe and help them think differently, and offer reassurance about their role in loss and with grief. Focus on the present and things in your control. When we experience loss, it's easy to become overwhelmed by all the unknowns and what-if scenarios. Help kids accept what they can't change by focusing on the here and now and what's within their control. While we can't control how long COVID-19 will affect our lives, we can control how we react and try to find the good in the little things. So this isn't silver lining pain. And I want to be really clear, that's not what we're trying to do here, but kind of now picking apart and dissecting what are the things that we can't control, and then how can we effectively react to those things in healthy ways. Make time for laughter and joy. When facing grief and loss, it can feel like a struggle to find joy, and it can even feel inappropriate or insensitive to have fun after suffering loss. This is very common in the work that we do. We say often in our grief groups, it's like a good wedding or a funeral, where there's lots of tears, but there's also lots of laughter. There's this sense that we're tapping in to both, and that both can exist. So it's non-binary, right? We can feel really sad that we've lost someone dear to us, and we can also enjoy things that maybe they enjoyed, right? And we can continue to live and to laugh and to love. And our best grief groups, whether we're working with children or teens or adults, is when a grief group has this power amongst themselves to encourage each other, to give them permission to grieve, which sometimes people feel like they can't, but also give them permission to laugh and to love and to live. And so making sure that you're modeling that out for them is a really important way that we can support our children and teens.
And Chris, I'd like to add for the younger elementary age children, a lot of times they will be playing, and play is a great way for them. But we can notice they'll be playing, and then the next minute they're crying. And then 5 minutes later, they're back to playing with their friends or blocks or Legos or toys or whatever it is. And that's absolutely normal for kids that age. And it'll look a little different for our teenagers or our tweens. They'll might be on their phone, and then they see something, a TikTok, a memory, a smell that could trigger their grief. And they'll be sad for a moment, and then they will quickly go back to what it was they were doing. But those periods of time may be longer for older children. Our younger age children, because their brains developmentally are not quite there yet, they'll grieve in shorter periods of time and then go back to the day. Whereas teens and adults might grieve for longer periods of time because they have the ability to fully understand the permanence of the death and the permanence of the loss that's happened in their lives. So just be mindful as you're working with your kid, depending on their age.
Practice healthy habits. And again, this is one of those things that's really important for parent and caregivers, as well as our children and our teens. Sleep, exercise, balanced nutrition. These are all really important for the health of your body and mind, and always, right? And all the more important when we're experiencing heavy waves of grief. You can encourage kids to practice other coping strategies to help manage their feelings, such as listening to music, creating art, journaling, breath work, grounding, mindfulness, and progressive muscle relaxation or guided imagery. But practicing healthy habits, moving your body, being grounded in your body are all really healthy things to do, especially while you're grieving. And again, we come back to being a role model yourself. You are an example, whether it's sharing your own grief and loss experienced or demonstrating how you use healthy coping strategies. Create opportunities to model these healthy behaviors for your teen or for your child. And again, what I will say about grief in our experience after doing this for so many years is our kids, our teens often learn how to grieve by our grief. So we model that for them and we teach them how to do that. For instance, it's very common for a family who doesn't express a lot of emotions to be a fear to express emotions for a child or a teen. Often with these kids or teens, they feel like, if I fall apart, I won't be able to be put back together again. There's this inherent fear around expressing the fullness of emotions. So one of the things we use is a slinky, and we'll show them like a slinky that it's okay at times to fall apart and to cry and to let those emotions out, and to see just like a slinky, we can come back together and we'll be okay. This is one of the most important things that we can do when we model for kids, is that we give ourselves permission to grieve. In families, so often a child will not want to grieve in front of a parent or caregiver because they're fearful that it's going to cause them sadness and grief, and vice versa. We hear this all the time where parents and caregivers feel like I have to be strong for my child, so they're not going to see me cry. They're not going to see me feel sad. And so then what do we teach them indirectly? We teach them not to cry or to feel sad. So being a role model, reminding yourself that we have to model out what this looks like for our kids to grieve well. And lastly, connect with others. Interacting with friends and family help us not to feel so alone in our grief. But connecting with other people is super important. And like David mentioned in the beginning, one of our common phrases is we suffer in isolation and we begin to heal in community. So it's probably one of the things that's hardest when there's grief. I've heard it once said of it's like the phone weighs 10,000 pounds. It's so hard to pick it up and reach out and to connect with other people. But almost always after connecting with others, we feel better. And so making sure that, again, you're modeling that and you are creating environments to connect with others is a great way to support your child or teen.
Thank you, Chris. And that kind of leads us into our next piece of our presentation, which is around what are some actual resources for families here in the greater Long Beach area. And our mission, again, connecting bereaved children and families together for hope and healing through connection and support. And so we want to encourage you to connect and not maybe just necessarily with New Hope, but with others, your family, your neighbors, whatever that looks like, whoever's in your tribe, who's in your corner. It's so important. I want to remind folks, though, too, to be mindful to help children preserve and create memories of the loved ones. So often, again, we have memorials, we have funerals, and we tend to move on, and we might remember them at a certain time of the year. But, creating a memory box to keep special objects in that belong to the loved one is a great thing for kids to do. They can put stickers, they can paint it, you can mosaic it. That becomes something special for them to put their treasures in. Make a memory book or scrapbook with your family. Ask others to share stories about the person who died. My mom died when I was young. I did not know a lot about my mom. And I can't tell you how good it felt when I hear other people tell me a funny story about my mom when she was younger, getting in trouble, or, something special she did, or even how my mom impacted their lives. And they'll say how special she was and that they loved her, and they knew that she loved her. And when I hear that, I'm filled. And so be mindful, to share those stories. And if you're at a party or somewhere and there's someone in the room who knew the person, ask them to share a story with your son or daughter so that they could hear that and know that they're, because I think once we become parents, our kids could never believe that we too were once young or that we were teenagers or young adults. And so I really encourage people to share those stories, especially when moms and dads die young and kids don't really get to grow up with them. That can be so special. They may want to carry a picture or object that reminds them of the person who's dead. Let them do that. Maybe you need to let the teacher know or whoever, but let them keep a picture in their backpack, or maybe it's a small stuffed animal or some object that just feels near and dear to them. Let them do that. That's okay. Also, anticipate grief triggers from special days during the year. We are headed into the holidays. Holidays are tend to be the hardest time for people who are grieving. If you're with Thanksgiving and Christmas and gatherings in October and even Dia de los Muertos and different things, but funerals and memorials and death anniversaries are triggers for adults, and they can be triggers for kids. Birthdays for the deceased, and your child's birthday. I will be vulnerable and share. My birthday's coming up November 1st. And for me, that's really hard. It's just another year that I don't get to be with my mom. And to be a little more vulnerable, I have a son who my mother never met. So her grandson. And so it's important for me too to be figuring out, how do I share the life of my mother with my son? So just be mindful that these days can be triggers, and be looking at calendars for knowing what days could potentially be triggers for yourself and your kids. Christmas, Thanksgiving, other cultural holidays, and then life events, graduations, getting a driver's license, going to prom, sports activities, and other life milestones. Those can all be triggers for us as kids, and even as they get older, beyond graduation, be getting married, having kids. Those can all be milestones that will trigger grief, because as you hear say today, there are no timelines on grief. Grief never ends. It just changes, and we change with it. So we have some grief and loss resources for you and your family. They will also be posted in the comment section of the YouTube video, a couple in English and Spanish that we'd love for you guys to check out at your own time and leisure. You can download them, but some for you. We do support groups in partnership with Long Beach Unified School District for first grade through 12th graders. I want to encourage you to check in with your school counselor or your family resource center to find out what campuses we're at. And if we're not at your campus, let's figure out how we can get there. Maybe talk to your school counselor, to the FRC. We'd love to be able to come out and support your kids' needs and families' needs on campus. This is actually a photo from one of our grief support groups, I believe at Jane Addams Elementary School in North Long Beach. We have a family camp we do annually coming up. It's this Saturday. I know it's short notice. We've actually have room for a few families. We'd love for you to join. Again, there's links below the video, or you can go to our website and find out more information there. But we encourage you to get that in tonight or tomorrow so we can get you on our roster. It's in Long Beach. It's one day. It's from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. Your whole family is welcome to come. We provide childcare if needed. We provide all the meals. And your family, just like the families you see here in the photo, will get to come together and have some fun like this. This is a couple of our campers from 2018 from Jane Addams. They came with their family and got to enjoy our Instagram moment there at camp. We also, Children's Grief Awareness Day is coming up November 18th. It's the whole month, though, also. This is a great way to start a community conversation, a conversation in your home, at the school level, to talk about that kids grieve too, not just adults. And how do we stand in solidarity with kids who are grieving and not be afraid to have those hard conversations. One of the things we do is we print these out on the right-hand side, probably, let's say, New Hope gives grieving children a voice. You can write your name, print it out, and just like our friends did here from the Miller Foundation, they took a picture and posted it. That's one way you can show that you stand with your grieving kids and those around the country. We have New Hope for the Holidays coming up December 2nd. It's a Thursday night. This is a family-friendly event here in Long Beach. It's an opportunity to learn how to make a plan going into the holidays, have a strategy for how you and your family can get through the holidays with a loved one gone, how you'll prepare for that, conversations you'll have. Are you going to hang up a stocking? Are you not? Are you going to decorate the tree or not? We talk about and cover all those kinds of things. Again, childcare is provided, completely free to attend. We just need you to RSVP. Again, the link is in below the video. And we've come to a time in our presentation. I know that Rebecca has been working hard behind the scenes, taking those questions.
We do. We have some questions, and I just want to start by saying, wow, what a valuable resource you are for our community, and we're so thankful to have you with us here today. I'm just, my father passed away 23 years ago, and I was finding myself connect in so many moments throughout your presentation. So thank you for all that you've shared. And we do have some families that the questions started rolling in here at the last moment here. So we have a question from a family. It says, if a family member passed away during preschool years, when the child doesn't fully understand death, will some of that psychological or emotional, social emotional effects present themselves later when they're maybe 5, 6, or 7?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that's an often neglected segment of our communities, are people who feel like they didn't have this personal relationship with someone who died because they were too young. But inevitably what happens is, they will grieve the relationship they didn't have, right? They will grieve the role of that person in their life at each one of those milestones, right? When they graduate middle school or graduate high school, or the first of whatever it might be, to be reminded again that that person isn't involved in their life. I think that, again, finding ways to initiate those conversations to acknowledge that pain, because again, kind of what I alluded to before is, we don't want to bring it up because we think we're going to make someone sad, but grief is there, right? We acknowledged, as we showed in that slide, it's not going to get smaller over time. And we can grieve just as much the relationship we didn't have, a relationship we did have, right? In some ways, we can even romanticize that, and it can become bigger, right? And even a better relationship that they're missing out on because they didn't experience the real one. So this is one that actually will lead to complicated grief if it's not, if it doesn't have a chance to be acknowledged and expressed in these stages. So I think I want to thank you for asking the question. I want to point out that this is often an overlooked segment within our population, and that grief is very real. It needs to be acknowledged and it needs to be witnessed.
And I'd like to add, Chris, keeping in mind too that at each developmental stage, a child's brain and their ability to understand permanence of loss and death changes over time. And so kids can actually re-grieve things as their brains become more fully developed at each developmental milestone. So we have parents all the time say, I don't think my kid's grieving. Well, they're grieving, trust us. They're just grieving in their own way. But when they hit these developmental milestones, they can also re-grieve, because now the understanding of the permanence of the loss of the relationship can be better understood by them developmentally.
That's a perfect segue into the next question. The next question here asks, a very present grandmother passed suddenly the first week of school, but my kids have shown very little emotion, and they even say, what gives? I feel like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. So, yeah.
That's a great question. Yeah, and there's so much there. It's very dynamic, right? So part of it can be shock. Part of it can be what we've discussed around, is it safe to grieve? Do I need to be strong for my siblings? Which again is, when you think of a parentified child, it's a child who feels responsible to take care of a parent, right? If they see that you are really impacted by the grief, they may feel like there's no space for them to have such a reaction. So that could be part of it. It could be developmental, as David mentioned, understanding the permanence of it. So it's a very dynamic situation. But I think trying to find ways to ask open-ended questions. So often we're projecting our own anxiety. If you are comfortable with the discussion, if you are comfortable with the emotions, and if you are comfortable asking the questions, typically they will step into that space when they know that it's safe. And then sometimes, because of the type of griever they are, they're just not ready to. And so finding other ways to build connection to the loved one, finding other ways to express emotion through music and art and journaling, these are things that can be encouraged. And again, with the holidays coming, everyone's going to be thinking about it. And so finding ways and having a plan to figure out, okay, what are we going to do this year? And even naming it, grandma not being here this year. I know we're all really sad about that. I feel really sad. And then allow them to feel and get in touch with those emotions, so that now you can move forward and try to have some kind of holiday season together, I think is going to be really important, even if they're, resistant.
Thank you. And all of this is so good. We have a question here from a family who's wondering, how closely would you recommend these tips of grief and loss? Do they parallel the loss of other things, such as the loss of family structure due to a move or due to a divorce or separation, even pets? Are these stages of grief or are these coping mechanisms? Would you find parallels, or how would you compare?
Yeah. So, grief is, by a definition, physical, spiritual, emotional reaction to loss. And that can be all loss, right? And so all of those types of losses that you've described are losses that need to be acknowledged. And again, our grief needs to be witnessed, and we need to be able to express those things. So it becomes very similar. The way that we grieve for bereavement is the way that we need support around grief for all loss, right? So wherever there is love, and then there is loss, there will be grief. So jobs, family, marriages,
incarceration,
deportation, any type of separation, right? They're often called ambiguous loss, where it's like, well, it's not a death, so maybe I shouldn't be feeling the things that I'm feeling, but in many ways it is a huge loss that needs to be grieved. And we need to validate, witness, and support people who are grieving those types of losses.
Thank you. The other questions that came through are very specific, and they're really families that are asking for some specific answers to questions. So if you are one of those families, please know that we have your contact information. I will be sending you phone numbers. I will be sending you some information tomorrow. So be on the lookout for an email, because we have some families that want to give you a call tomorrow that will be looking and using our resources. So I want to thank you for answering the questions for our families here today. We had a lot of viewers that were tuning in. This is definitely a topic that must have hit home for a lot of our families. And so I want to thank you both for being with us today. On behalf of Long Beach Unified, I want to thank all of our presenters. I want to thank all of the families who were tuning in. And I hope that we can all maybe have a follow-up session to this, because this was some powerful information. So I'm going to sign us off as we're getting close to 6 o'clock. And again, if you had questions I didn't get to, we will be in touch tomorrow. To our presenters, thank you for being here. And to everybody, have a good evening.
Thank you.